Thank you, Annette, for the introduction. My name is Monica Monaco. I run and funded TrustEU Affairs. I started in 2013, so we're now active 8 years. My company does follow for its clients the European regulatory developments. I'm based in Brussels since 2003, and before funding TrustEU Affairs in 2013, I was Senior Manager Regulatory Affairs for Visa Europe in Brussels for 11 years, taking care of the relations with the European Parliament, the Council, and the Commission. So I do regulatory since in total 22 years now.
Perfect, thank you. And Bridget?
Hi everyone, my name is Bridget and I do government relations at WISE, formerly known as TransferWise, based out of Brussels but focused on EU policy, so closely following finance and payments. So really happy to join this discussion today.
Perfect, thank you. So we're going to talk about payments and payments data today, and I think we would kick off with a question for you to start off with, Monica. Could you tell a bit about what is the EU data strategy and what does it aim for?
Sure. So the EU data strategy is part of what we call here the new digital strategy of the European Commission. So the new digital strategy of the European Commission is mainly composed by two parts, one being the data strategy and the other being the work on the artificial intelligence, so the white paper on artificial intelligence. So the first part of the new digital strategy, the data strategy, was published by the Commission in February 2020. And it contains a number of different initiatives, which I'm going to detail to you now. But first, I wanted to talk 1 second about which is the vision of the data economy. And so what the Commission wants to do with the data strategy. So what the Commission is trying to do with this data strategy, which again is composed of different initiatives, is to create some form of data economy so some form of single market for data also in Europe. So the idea is to allow free flow of data between countries and sectors in Europe, but under the framework of respecting the protection of this data. So at the same time, this is about exchange of data and traveling of data and portability of data. But a balance should be found between this portability of data and indeed the protection of this data according to European rules. And that's where the aim of the data strategy is very ambitious at the same time also quite complex because of the restriction in terms of regulatory boundaries for the let's say flow of data in Europe. So how the data package is composed? Well, first of all, we have what we call the Data Governance Act. The Data Governance Act was published in November 2020. On the Data Governance Act, I invite you to read a very interesting opinion that was published by the European Data Protection Board on the 25th or 26th of May, 19th of May to be precise, 19th of May, where they are comparing the content of the Data Governance Act and the GDPR. So we already see in this opinion from the EDPB how at the same time this is about transferring of data, but it's also about protection of data. And so what the EDPB is saying about the Data Governance Act in this opinion on the 19th of May is precisely this, that the balance should be found between the protection of data and the, let's say, the sharing of data. Another part of the data package is the Data Act, which is soon to come. And on this one, there is an inception paper, the inception assessment paper that was published by the Commission last week, which is also very interesting because it's explaining really how the Commission would like with this data package to create some form of fairness in the data economy, addressing at the same time the difficulties of access to data and also the use of data in specific situations like the B2B context. On top of the Data Act and the Data Governance Act, the data package will also contain a review of the Database Directive and also a review or a clarification of the Trade Secrets Directive. So all these initiatives together have to be combined at the same time with the protection of data. So the GDPR plus the e-privacy directive, which is under review since a couple of years now, and will be at some point the e-privacy regulation. If the e-privacy regulation is finalized at some point, this is going on for a while. So the discussion here is really not only about personal data, but also about non-personal data, and how non-personal data should be protected because they have a commercial value, how they should be shared, which is the portability of those, and then this in the European context, but also then there is the international aspect and how this data should be shared outside of Europe. So it's a fairly complex piece of let's say, a piece of strategy of the Commission. I find it very ambitious and also very far-looking. In terms of how this impacts the industry, well, first of all, the idea here is to improve data and application portability between cloud computing services in the old data economy. So there is an impact on cloud computing, but there is also about improving technical standards for portability of data generated by individuals. And here there is a competition angle in all this, because all the discussion, what we see in how the Commission discussed this data package and the data strategy, there is always a competition angle in terms of how the control of this data and how the data access and the access to data, how this is somehow let's say, shared and between different parties in B2B, and which is the power in the negotiation about the access to this data in the value chain. And so that's where we see that there are a number of considerations about, you know, from in the Commission document, the Inception assessment that was published this week, about how the data holder can be incentivized to share his data, and how the different parties in the negotiation on the use of this data have power to access to data. And so there is a reflection about not only usage rights, but also specific data access, and also, you know, how this in B2B situations is dealt with in terms of contractual negotiations between within the parties. So what I see doing this work 23 years now is that the focus from the Commission has shifted from looking at fees as a way to remunerate business to looking at data and access to data as the source of revenue for the businesses. And so all the principle of this data strategy is to look at how access to data is guaranteed, who has access to data, under which conditions, and what does this mean in terms of competition in the market between the different stakeholders.
That's a very interesting point. So Bridget, from a company operating in this field, so what challenges do I have relating to data, and any of these initiatives, are you expected any of these initiatives to sort of solve that partly or fully?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Monica, what you mentioned about the focus on sort of competition angle is really interesting, because until now, basically, certain players have sort of acted as data controllers of consumer data. And now the focus is sort of putting the power back in the hands of consumers. And so at Wise, we really believe that consumers have sort of a fundamental right to access and control their financial data. And we think that when we sort of share that data securely, and they can choose to do what they want with it, they can better manage their finances. So this is related to, excuse me, open banking, but also open finance, which will stimulate competition, give consumers more choice, more transparency in terms of choosing financial products. But right now, open banking still hasn't fully taken off in terms of, you know, fragmentation in standards and the APIs across Europe. So we'd really like to see that be fully implemented on the PSD2 side of things. But then also sort of looking ahead to open finance, we believe that that should be based on, you know, ongoing right of portability under GDPR, not necessarily extending sort of PSD2 and trying to regulate sector by sector, because what we've seen is that there are limitations to that. And we really need to sort of foster a data sharing environment and not just try to sort of put regulatory pressure to open up the data. But I think just to bring this back to sort of like, what is the real life application of open finance? You know, when's the last time that you switched your workplace pension provider? Probably never, because it's very confusing and it's very opaque and it's time consuming. And so something like open finance, where you know, we would be allowed to sort of aggregate data and create comparison tools so that consumers could compare, which we already do at Wise. We compare different providers and show them which is the cheapest option, even if that option is not us necessarily. It's really important to give that transparency. And I think that that will only drive down price and give more consumer choice. And so we think, that's a really, really exciting development. We'll see what sort of happens at the EU level in terms of waiting for a potential new proposal. I think it's in 2022.
Yes.
Yeah. Going to your point about open finance. So you say that you're not necessarily looking for sort of regulatory steps here, but I guess it would be a challenge to get anyone to open up if we didn't have regulatory steps. Or what is your view on that, Bridget?
I think there does need to be regulatory steps, but what we've seen is with open banking, for example, and comparing it to the relative success in the UK, was that the UK created sort of one common standard through the open banking implementation entity, and versus in Europe where that hasn't happened, we've seen basically, I think the number is 40% lower success rates than just sending a bank transfer. So that's just evidence that open banking isn't quite there yet in Europe. So I think there should be sort of regulatory action, definitely, but it needs to also be looking at the broader market and enabling the sort of data sharing, not the idea that you give your data to, let's say, a bank, and then they get to keep that from anyone else. There needs to be sort of an approach to this, which is secure, but also in the power and the control of the consumer to make those choices. So I don't know if Monica, you have a little bit more insight on the open finance, like what they're specifically looking to do.
Yes, sure. So when we were discussing a couple of minutes ago the data strategy and the Data Act, which is now in the making, also explains that this will be followed up by a number of technical initiatives per sector. So somehow we can link the open finance framework, which is mentioned in the retail payment strategy that the Commission published last September, to the Data Act in this way. So if we take the retail payment strategy from the Commission, we see that this was published in September. I personally adore this document. I mean, it has 20-something pages. It's extremely clear. It's one of the clearest documents I've read in my career about what the Commission wants to do in the next 4 or 5 years. It's very structured. And what we've seen there is indeed the review of the PSD2 to come later this year. And then for 2022, the retail payment strategy explains that there will be this open finance framework. And now this open finance framework, the way in which it's described, this is something which will a framework, so legal initiative of some sort. We don't know which type though. It's not written whether this will be a directive, a regulation, or only some form of recommendation. We don't know. It's not written there. But the idea is that open finance will be a framework, a legislative framework of some sort, which will connect payments and data. So if we look at this in the framework of the data strategy of the Commission, this could be one of the technical per sector initiatives that the Commission will take as far as data is concerned. This time it's data in the finance sector. So how this will be structured is difficult to know. Indeed, there is the open banking initiative in the UK. I would guess, and this is again guessing, it would be some form of a EU version of the open banking in the UK. Now, how this version will be built, this will have to be built around the legislative framework that exists in Europe. So again, the Data Governance Act, the GDPR, the e-privacy regulation, if by then this will be finalized. And so we will have to work around how these pieces of law connecting together could, at the same time, safeguard data appropriately as they should be under European law, but also allow the exploitation of this data and access to this data by the different actors in the market. And again, in the open finance framework, I think the competition angle would be quite important in terms of having also fairness in the B2B environment in terms of how these data are accessed, and also to avoid that unilaterally one actor, for example, the incumbents, if we were to talk about banks, could impose unfair conditions to access to this data to competitors. So it's extremely delicate file, and I think it's going to be quite complex file. This will be certainly preceded by the PSD3, so the review of the PSD2, which will also give us more instruments in then understanding the open finance project. I think this is very ambitious. It's also a project which is long due. As Brigitte is explaining, it's the situation is certainly far more advanced in the UK now. So also from a competition perspective, in terms not only competition between incumbents and newcomers in the market, but also competition between Europe and non-European countries. This is something the Commission is now looking at. And again, there is always this reflection about third countries and access to data of European consumers from third countries, but also access to metadata, not only personal data, but also metadata concerning European consumers, how this could be exploited, and what about the production of this data in third countries. So it's an extremely complex piece. Personally, I think open finance will be a success. Because there will be the conditions for this to be a success, but it's a piece of it's a framework that has to be built with a lot of attention, precisely because of the regulatory constraints that we have in Europe.
Do you have any insight on, or any guess at least, on how this will be structured, as on very specific areas, whether there will be one piece of regulation for, if say that sort of the open banking is kept in PSD2 or PSD3, we get another framework, for example, for insurance or something, and they're not entirely aligned. I could see issues for providers using, all kinds of data, but they may not be regulated, exactly the same way.
Yeah, this is very interesting what you are saying, Annette. This is extremely interesting, and it's something which is mentioned in the Data Act inception assessment that was published last week from the Commission, because there is a paragraph there that talks about use of data by different sectors, and especially data which are automatically created. And that are then shared by different sectors. They give the examples of data about driving cars, and how this data can be used at the same time by the manufacturer company that is building the cars, and also by the insurers who are going to look at this data in order to calculate the price for the insurance policy. And what the Commission says in this inception assessment is that these cases have to be analyzed with attention, because the repercussions could be different depending on the sector we are looking at. So this is an extremely interesting aspect, the ones you're mentioning, and is indeed a very let's say one that would require a lot of attention. But indeed, I think it's already in the Data Act, the Commission is already thinking that this will be an issue. As portability is, they are also mentioning portability, both in terms of portability for users' data, but also portability from a business to another. So I would say the three main aspects that we will have to look at under open finance, as we are now under the Data Act, are precisely what happens for the use of this data in different financial sectors, because again, what happens if they are regulated in a different way? Second, what happens for automatic data that are generated automatically, how they are protected and how this is looked at. Third, cloud computing, how cloud computing is also affected in this. And maybe fourth aspect, IoT, and how IoT will also be looked at in this framework. So it's finance, and it's called open finance, but this is about the data and payments together. And the interconnection between those two elements is something that has to be looked at very carefully. So I think PSD3 will already give us more clarity about where to go. In the meantime, the Data Act will be finalized, and very likely also the privacy regulation. So I think we will have let's say a more stable framework to then build on for having the open finance in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Brigitte, again, for a company operating in this space, so what new do you already, I'm already discussing at Wise sort of what new possibilities open finance could bring, or new products, or maybe, and also do you already get other kinds of financial data? Are some companies or players in the market actually opening more up than limited to payment accounts, or what is your experience?
I mean, I think looking ahead to sort of PSD3 and, the opportunities that we see, obviously PSD2 is sort of centered on open banking and strong customer authentication. And I think really important to note that what we see globally is that other regions and jurisdictions are looking to how Europe is regulated and taking cues and being inspired by that, which is, I think, a testament to its success. Like I said, there's still work to be done to fully implement it. So we still see sort of a lack of data parity in some of the APIs, which is still a hurdle for third-party providers. But looking ahead to PSD3, we actually think there's opportunities even beyond necessarily open banking. So one thing that's really sort of core to us is transparency. And the first PSD, actually not PSD2, but the first PSD introduced transparency and sort of more information for consumers related to sort of execution times and fees for their payments. And so we actually think, and granted the EU has taken some steps to address transparency in cross-border payments with the cross-border payments regulation, we think that actually within PSD3, there's a huge opportunity to extend transparency measures to remittances, because this is a UN Sustainable Development Goal to reach lower cost of remittances by 2030 to less than 3%. And right now, the top 3 EU countries are missing that target, and they are on track to miss that target. And just practically, that means that today, from a payments perspective, if you send money from one EU member state cross-currency to another, you will have a transparent payment under CBPR2. But right now, if you send money from the EU to a third country, that's not covered by any transparency requirements. And there is sort of global momentum from the World Bank and from the Global Forum on Remittances and the FSB to introduce total cost transparency. So showing the total cost of a payment, including the exchange rate markup, to the consumer ahead of making the payment. And we think PSD3 review is the perfect time for the EU to take a leading role on this and really take kind of bold action. So I think that's not necessarily directly related to sort of the data theme, but it is related to transparency, and open finance also seeks to sort of improve that transparency element. So beyond that, I think there's going to be much more to come in terms of innovation and payments, and hopefully PSD3 can capitalize and sort of fix some of the gaps that we saw with open banking, but then also go beyond that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, Monica, do you have any, we keep talking about PSD3, so do we know anything about timing? Do we know anything about content besides maybe open finance?
Okay, so in terms of timing, what I know is that it's this year. It's in 2021. It should follow the review of the 5th Anti-Money Laundering Directive. So we expect the 6th Anti-Money Laundering Directive, or the first Anti-Money Laundering regulation, to be out end of June, beginning of July. And after this, there will be PSD3. So I expect PSD3 in November or December this year, maybe a bit earlier, but that's in the autumn, let's say autumn or just before the end of the year. In terms of timing, at least this is what we understand here. Now, in terms of, and these are the rumors, and then it's also mentioned in the retail payment strategy that it will be a second part of 2021. But I understand it's going to be just after, or 2 or 3 months after, the review of the AML, which is foreseen normally by the end of this month or beginning of next month. So again, it should be in the autumn. In terms of possible content, here we open a Pandora box with a lot of wishful thinking and a lot of possible hypotheses, depending on who you talk to. Huh? So if you talk to technical providers, they would tell you that they are not in scope. Now, what we hear also at the same time is that it's possible that technical providers who are currently out of scope of the PSD2 via Article 3, especially Article 3M and L, they may be getting in scope. There are a lot of indications about this, also public indications. For example, BaFin has been already explaining many times in public. Also, in one of the interviews I did to BaFin, this was told during the interviews when I was having the interview with the president of BaFin, but also in a different public fora. They've been saying that they would ask the Commission to have technical providers in scope of the PSD2 because supervision of PSD3, because supervision of technical providers providers otherwise is not allowed fully, and there have been references to cases of misconduct in the business in the past, and this has been referred to as a condition linked to the fact that technical providers are not in scope. So BaFin has been public on this. Also, the Bulgarian government has been public on this. There are many national governments who have already expressed this wish to the Commission that technical providers should be in scope, motivating this again with the will of supervising them. If you read the EBA, the European Banking Authority recent documents in the last 2 or 3 months, there is many times this request to the Commission of having a full supervision on technical providers. So it seems that there are signals that indicate they will indeed be in scope. Now again, they may not, and but this is possible. Another aspect that is very likely to be covered is the interplay between the GDPR and also the e-money directive, and how this would be eventually, because the e-money directive, again, it's a piece of law that should be reviewed since a while. This dates back to 2009. It had to be reviewed by 2012. Here we are, 11 years later, this never happened. So it's a kind of easy guess to say that it's possible that there's going to be also something in the PSD3 about the e-money directive, some form of review of the e-money directive, a connection with the GDPR. Then maybe a creation of a new licensing regime, maybe a new licensing regime for technical providers. I mean, who knows? When I started to work on payments, there was pre-PSD1. In PSD1, there was the creation of these, let's say, payment institutions and the whole regime and the licensing. And PSD2 created the TPPs with all that, the regime, the licensing regime for them and all the characteristics. So it's very likely that PSD3 may create again a new licensing regime. Would this be the licensing regime for technical providers? I don't know. It's possible. Some people would talk about a licensing regime for fintechs, but again, what is a fintech and how this could be defined? Would this end up being a technical provider, which is doing payments without having a license? I don't know. And then there will be also adjustments in terms of very likely, at least that's what I think, everything connected to instant payments. So we expect a separate legislative initiative on instant payments. There are rumors about this, but if indeed there is a separate legislative initiative on instant payments, then PSD3 will also need to adjust a number of provisions. For example, the D+1 rule could become the D rule, or consumer protection aspects may be reviewed. Again, there is a lot that could be in PSD3. What I personally think is that when I look at the progression between PSD1 and PSD2, I would assume there is indeed a new licensing regime which is going to be created of some sort. And again, technical providers may be in scope because already a number of member states have requested this to the Commission, also publicly, in public fora. Now, how will this, let's say, pan out together depends on a number of factors. But at least for what I understand from being here, from the rumors I hear are around these aspects. There could be more, there could be less, but I don't think this is completely, absolutely wrong with my list of what could be in there.
So when you say technical providers, I guess that could include big techs, right?
Yes, this could include any business which is using Article 3 exemptions. So Article 3 of PSD2 is an interesting article. It has been already shrinked. If you take Article 3 in PSD1 and then so Article 3 is about out of scope, whatever is out of scope of PSD. So when you take Article 3 in PSD1 and you compare it with Article 3 in PSD2, the exemptions have been shrinking and shrinking. So even the definitions are in order to avoid, because the regulator didn't want a lot of providers to be out of scope, so they've been specified further. Now we have in the Article 3 of the PSD2 we have the exemption for closed networks, let's say limited networks. This is very likely to stay because their networks are very different from the others by the way in which they are built. The definition in PSD2 is very stringent, so I don't see how else this could be changed. But then there are all the other parts of Article 3. So typically 3L and 3M, which are about technical providers. Indeed, this could could be big techs, this could be some processors. It's to be seen now how the Commission will tackle this. But it's likely that some of those may be in scope. Again, there have been requests by a number of member states already to the Commission to look at this.
Okay, very interesting. So just for the audience, we do have a bit more than 5 minutes left. Please do, if you have any questions, put them in the chat and we will put them forward. So Bridget, you touched a bit about this already, but so the biggest wish for PSD3, what would that be?
I think definitely what I mentioned in terms of transparency and cross-border payments, but I also think what Monica brought up about instant payments is really interesting, and how will that align with the PSD review? We're certainly keen to see instant payments become the new normal. Actually, 38% of all of our payments globally today are instant, so done in less than 20 seconds. We do see some industry players sort of dragging their feet on this, and we think that this will just spur more innovation in the payments market and also fulfill sort of the Commission's goal to enable pan-European payments. So for example, using an instant payment at your local coffee shop could be one way of doing that. If we can really achieve the uptake and get rid of sort of premium pricing on instant payments, we think that's a really, really good thing. And I think it will be interesting to see how that interplays with the PSD review.
That's interesting. So another sort of topic when you talk about data is sort of the and regulation is EU ID, which was proposed recently. Any views on that, Bridget?
Yeah, I mean, I think this does relate to sort of the data topic, because ultimately, you know, a digital identity, it's your personal data. And so we also think that consumers should have full control over their digital identity. And we're really excited to see the EU's proposal. This has been a topic that fintechs have been talking about over the past years. It's very difficult and fragmented across the EU market to onboard customers, but also as a consumer to use a financial service, a digital financial service in another EU member state, because maybe, you know, there's certain requirements, or you only have your Belgian EID, for example. So now this new proposal would basically allow citizens to access and control their digital identity at the EU level, which I think is really great. And they're putting a big emphasis on putting the consumer at the center. And this is also a competition angle because, you know, as uptake of digital finance increases, onboarding and fair access to sort of identification methods are really important. We have seen private sector initiatives at the member state level, for example, in the Nordics, that fintechs cannot necessarily access, created by certain players. So I think this initiative will be really good in terms of sort of democratizing the digital ID, giving all EU citizens access and control, and also importantly, being sure that their data is safe.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, we do have sort of a governmental idea here in Denmark, or initiated. Yeah, and that works well in Denmark, but it would be nice with sort of an EU identity. So in a payments context, Monica, do you have anything? How does this fit with PSD3 coming up, or any of the other regulation?
Well, yes, this could be looked at, for example, when we look at strong customer authentication, and now strong customer authentication provisions may evolve in PSD3. Would an EID be part of strong customer authentication? How this will be upgraded or updated or improved as a system in PSD3? It's possible, indeed it's possible. There is a lot of work going on e-identity in general, also not only in connection to payments, but also in connection to AML and the fraud angle. So there is work with the e-eIDAS directive. There is work that the Commission, especially DG Connect, is conducting on this matter since years. And one of the last parts of this work is precisely to connect the idea of e-identity to control of fraud and so payments and also AML policy. So maybe, yes, maybe in PSD3, strong customer authentication will be reviewed and rephrased in a way that the EID will be part of it. But this is really not even wishful thinking. This is really guessing exercise.
Yeah, we just got a question from the audience. So with reference to review of eIDAS, what impact do you see in the current ID requirements upon third-party providers in the PSD2 APIs environment? Does anyone, Bridget or Monica, have a view on that?
I'll leave it to Monica, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is the $1 million questions.
Yeah.
How is this going to change for third-party payments providers? This is very, I mean, will it change? How would this? I would hope that if there is a use of e-identity requirements in payments, this will improve the competition between incumbents and newcomers. This is all the discussion. It's in the end, it's access to data and being able to have data which are verified that allows success in a business. So this is again a competition aspect. Now, how this will happen, I don't know. What I can tell you about eIDAS, because I don't have a crystal ball yet, so I don't know exactly how this will be shaped. But I understand the question. It's a very important question. Now, what I can tell you about this is that when we look at eIDAS, there are, so forget about payments 1 second. We just let's take eIDAS, the directive. There are parts of it on which I think there is further work to be done. Typically the certificates level. I don't want to be too technical because we have a couple of minutes, but there are 3 different levels of certificates. And the member states can decide which is the most appropriate. And so what happens then is when you, in a cross-border context, we will have to see how these certificates can be exchanged between different member states. Some member states would, for example, only accept, and is the case now for a couple of member states, they only accept certificates under eIDAS that are issued by providers in their own member state. And so this entails also a cost. So if you are a third-party payment provider, or let's say an SME in one member state, and which has lower requirements, and you are tackling a client, or you're tackling a commercial exchange in a country which is a bigger country, where only certificates issued by providers of certificates in that countries are accepted, the cost of the certificate may be very high for you. I remember a very interesting debate in the European Parliament when eIDAS was written, precisely about this. So you had MEPs from Bulgaria, Romania, and Greece discussing this with MEPs from Germany and France, and I can tell you they didn't have the same view. Precisely because most of the biggest member states only indeed accept and value the highest level of certificate and certificates issued by providers in their own country. So again, if we transpose all this in payments, and we look already at the discrepancies between the incumbents, the banks, and the third-party payments providers, and then we look at different member states, if we are going in the sense of using this e-identity in payments, then we have to be sure that there we are competing we have a level playing field, and we are competing on good basis. It's extremely interesting debate, the one about the identity, but it's very difficult to know, I am afraid, how this will be tackled in the PSD3 context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a very good note to close this debate on. That sort of the aim is to compete on an equal basis. I guess that's the whole idea about PSD2 and hopefully PSD3 as well. Thank you both so much for your input and discussions during this panel.